Hello and welcome to the Alpha Demo and Q&A webcast. I'm Dave McCormick, VP of Product Management here at Alpha Software. I'm pleased to be joined today by two people, Sarah Mitchell, our Director of Customer Success and Head of Documentation, as well as Dion McCormick, no relation, but an Alpha Anywhere expert. You've probably heard many times here before. Today, I believe Dion is going to be talking about the best practices when doing Ajax callbacks. Is that right, Dion?
Yes, we're going to cover the basics and move from there.
All right, well, I got it right. Fantastic. I can already see your screen, so we're just about ready to get started. But just as a quick reminder, you can always send us questions at guides@alphasoftware.com, GUIDES at alphasoftware.com. And during this presentation, of course, you can use the chat box or the questions box in the GoToWebinar control panel and send in your questions that way. We'll be happy to get to them. So let's get started. All right, Dan, take it away.
Hey, thank you so much. By the way, have you ever noticed that you never see Sarah and Dion at the same place at the same time? So I wonder about that, Dave.
Yeah.
Yeah. Whoa, wait a minute.
Yeah.
Cool. Well, thank you, everybody. We really appreciate you joining us this week. I'm really looking forward to doing a quick overview of the Ajax system, talk about some best practices, some built-in tools and capabilities, and kind of go over that, just to give you a base there. Again, the goal of this is to help you. So help us help you by going to your Q&A, to the Q&A section of the panel questions. Ask your questions there, whether it's on this topic today or other topics you might have. We're going to do our best to try and cover those for you. And also remember, you can always send in emails to guides@alphasoftware.com, and that gives us great topics we can use for future projects and future presentations and webinars and things like that. So we really do appreciate you joining us, and we always love to hear back from you. So do let us know how that goes. So the focal point today is Ajax, but before we get into that, I did want to cover one other quick thing. Where is it? There it is. Coming up super quick. It's crazy. We're almost done with September. October's next month. Dave, do you realize that? It's like, yow.
Wait,
so
next
anyway,
month.
we
Hang
have
on.
coming up.
We've got it well in hand.
Isn't that crazy?
We've got it well in hand. We've got our schedule put together, which everyone will be able to see in the next, I don't know, week or so. And
good.
It's going to be great.
It's going to be phenomenal. So we're on October 18th, 21. I know most people have already gotten their tickets, but you haven't, always just go to alphasoftware.com, Devcon 2022. Hit that register, go in, and you're going to have a fantastic time. It's going to be a great event. Really looking forward to all the presentations and the details and information. There's a lot of really cool stuff being cooked behind the scenes that they're going to share. So I'm excited about that. So that's there. So let's go ahead and dive in. So today we're going to talk about Ajax, a sort of a base technology, but incredibly used within the Alpha platform. And so what I want to do is talk just a few minutes on the background, what it is, kind of why it was invented, what the pieces go from there. And then we'll move into the Alpha implementation, which really takes all the complexity away from you. Used to take a lot of basically programming and hand-holding and stuff like that. No more. Very, very simple. And what's nice is Alpha continues to add little features, capabilities to improve it, to enhance it, and to make things better for your application so you do less work, get more results from here. So what is Ajax? Ajax is basically a very lightweight, keyword lightweight, way for the browser to talk to the server and exchange data that server back to the client. So if you're on a web browser or a phone, it's a technology built in to the web basically, or into the platforms that allow you to quickly get information and from a server without having to do a lot of big heavy page loads and things like that. And that was the key kind of funding, is originally in the early days, you would call a page and it would send it down, download the whole page, and it would display it. Well, then, if you needed to update, like you clicked a button, the system would call, send that information back to the server, download a whole new page, and render it on your browser. So you had two impacts. One is you had the network latency of bringing down larger payloads from the server. You had more effort by the server since it had to generate more content, payload information to send down. And again, the rendering on the client's very quick, but it's all that latency and back-end kind of processing from there. So early on, they started to realize that it was really driving up basically server usage, which meant costs. And if you think about it, even earlier, the network connectivity wasn't very fast. So you got a lot of long, waits to load pages, and you just couldn't guarantee you do this. So they said, hey, is there a way for me to not have to do the whole page, but rather little small pieces? And that's where this came from. And it was really tied to the creation of JavaScript, because it's really done using JavaScript. So on the browser, basically what happens is that the system creates a request object and sends this. This is in JavaScript. And then that goes to the server. The server looks at it and says, oh, thank you very much. And it sends the response back to it. So it's like a whole page. But what's very cool is that it's a small subset of data. So the payload is very small, and therefore it's not having to re-render the whole page and send the whole page. And then on the browser, when the return data came in, JavaScript in the browser would then update the screen for you to show it, like for instance, to show or hide, or to change some text or something on the screen from there. And we're going to talk a little bit about the different ways to do that. Now, again, this was a little bit difficult at the beginning, and I'll talk about that a little bit more. So what are the benefits? You have smaller callbacks. There's smaller amount of data. You can also do asynchronous calls, which is kind of cool. You don't have to wait for the system to refresh the page. Basically, you can make the call, and then when the call is returned again from the server here, it would send that back, and the browser would be just basically waiting and saying, oh, wait, hey, I got my message, now I can do this. So you didn't have this like locking the screen or anything like that. You could do things asynchronously, which is really powerful and makes for a better user experience from that standpoint there. It is user-friendly, although I'll tell you, it's much more user-friendly than alpha than there. And most importantly is it increases the speed of all the operations, especially for the consumer who's using your application on the web browser. It really improves their sort of experience and just see things happen, and you can do some really cool stuff with it based on interacting with that web page without having to wait for these big long downloads to come down and refresh the page and stuff. And again, we're spoiled now with super high internet speeds, but when this was developed, those speeds were not there, so the impact was even more. But based on that, it opens up a lot of other cool features and capabilities you can do within the system. Now, one thing I wanted to remind you is that it was kind of based on JavaScript. So in the early days, you'd have to write JavaScript to make the call. And then when it came back, you had to process that JavaScript, and it just took a lot of knowledge of how that works. Now, that said, you can still do all that, generate JavaScript and run it locally for more advanced kind of capabilities. But what you'll see in a few minutes is that Alpha takes all of that effort off your sort of shoulders and makes it alpha centric in terms of easy to do. You can stay within Xbasic. You don't have to write a lot of JavaScript. Alpha takes care of all the work for you. So it's going to be pretty cool. So again, fewer callbacks. You can do asynchronous calls as user-friendly, and most importantly, increased speed. So with that kind of background, what I'd like to do is actually just kind of show you an example of how Ajax, and then kind of dive into the different elements as we go through that. So with that, just do a double check on my audio and video and make sure it's coming okay.
Okay, Dion, coming
Good,
through.
good.
Yep.
Want to do that. So we'll kind of go over here. So I am in the alpha development environment here over web goes. Now, so Ajax callbacks, you can implement it in A5W pages. That's absolutely A-okay. In fact, you know what? I want to do this real quick. Let me grab. This is a hit. This is on our documentation side. So you can go over there. It has a lot more detail than I'm giving you. It also shows example. The very first iteration by Alpha actually used A5W pages talking to each other. But once we started to create web components, UXs, a lot of the complexity was subsumed into that. So if you see little examples and documentation talking about creating a link in an A5W page, calling another A5W page to bring it back, that kind of stuff is a little older. It's still valid, it still works, but really where you're going to do your Ajax callback work is within the UX component. By the way, Alpha doesn't, behind the scenes, use Ajax for all the other components. So it's kind of a core technology. So you speed up like grid rendering and other things along those lines. Now, last thing on that is that there have been a little times where I've actually used the A5W concept and it worked really, really good. Basically, you have a page that calls another page, the other page returns some information. So there were some kind of special situations where I really couldn't use a UX. So I was able to fall back and use the base technology structure. Very, very cool there. Okay, so with that, I'm going to go ahead and create a new UX. So web component, and we'll go ahead and select a UX. And I'm not going to pick any particular template. I'm just going to go ahead and do that. Okay, so I'm going to create three things right here for advantage. I'm going to create 2 text boxes, number 1, number 2, and then actually I'm going to put 3, result. So the idea is here I'm going to create a little calculator and build into that. Now in here I'm going to also add a button in here. So we'll go ahead and do that. So we'll do a button, okay, and we'll say make call back. Okay, dynamite. So this is my base. So let's go ahead and we'll go webinar. So Ajax is so not to be confusing, Ajax is the underlying technology structure, but we also call them Xbasic callbacks because, and you'll see in a moment, we actually make a callback to Xbasic, and Xbasic is sort of running on the server as that, okay, what do you want to do? And then sends the information back from there. Now, I could easily render this as a couple ways, just to let you know. I could make this a calculated field by going down and doing a calculated field expression. The neat thing about that is it would be rendered and taken care of on the client. So if I put in a number here, number there, it would generate that result. You could also even write your own JavaScript. You could go in here and create a JavaScript function and do all that stuff. So this is a very simplistic example, but it's more just to show the basics of it. When you get into more sophisticated things, then you definitely are not going to be doing things on the client. You're going to be calling back. And the level of sophistication can be massive. You can call back, call APIs on the server and return data. You can do massive calculations. You can call other libraries. You can interact with the database. And anything you can do in Xbasic, you can basically handle in here. So it's really a powerful technology because it simplifies as sort of the glue and allows you to use all your creativity to create anything interesting from the standpoint of what it will do. So let's go ahead and show you a real simple one. The idea is I enter a number in number 1, I enter number 2, and then I create a result, and I want to then update that result. So I'm going to go to this button here. Now, normally I go to JavaScript actions and create my actions here. For this demo, I'm just going to go ahead and create the action on here. The reason I do that is that if I maybe have 2 or 3 buttons and I want to call the same action, I don't have to define it on every action. So I'm just going to shortcut it for today, but I highly recommend that all of your JavaScript actions should be created here. And then in your button, you can then call that JavaScript either through a text mode or through adding and then doing the run action kind of there. So again, going to make it simple for today. But I definitely recommend you try and do everything here because it makes your life easier, especially down the road. And the other thing that's nice, you can copy and paste this JavaScript or action JavaScript from one UX to another. You can rename it. There's so many things you can do in that mode right there. So we'll go here, I'm gonna add a new action. Okay, so you'll see right there, Ajax Callback and then Ajax Callback cross domain. So this is where you get access to it. You'll notice in here also you can write little inline JavaScript, just put your little code on here. So these are your 2 functions. Now, what is the difference between the 2? And that's very important for you to know. So Ajax Callback, the first one is, let's say you're on my domain www.myalphaawesomeapp.com and your server's under that domain. So you essentially are in a single domain, meaning your application is running and the function you're calling is also there. But that is where you'd use Ajax Callback. But you may have a situation, and this is in more sophisticated alpha deployments, is you may have a central application called My Core App, and in there you have a whole bunch of Xbasic and other things that service that is available for doing stuff. And then you might have created another app called My Awesome Alpha App, And then you're going to call cross domain, meaning the My Awesome Alpha app is going to call over to my core app. So that's called cross domain. So we can handle both situations. And you can see here, it's basically if you're going to call a web service different from the domain. And it's important because there's a bunch of security implications on that is handled by the Alpha technology that you don't have to worry about. It handles it for you, because the web found out very quickly that a great way to spoof people was fake them and have them go to another server they're not aware of, grab their data, do all those things. So there's a lot of built-in security and other things that will stop normally that happening. But with Alpha, we've built in that capability so you don't have to worry about that. So today I'm not going to worry about the cross domain. I'm going to focus on Ajax Callback. Okay, so it brings up a nice action. We're going to kind of go through these step by step, show you some other cool things here. But first thing I want to talk about is callback type. And there are two different callback types. One is an internal Xbasic function and the other is a URL. We're going to focus today on the internal Xbasic because it makes your life easy. It does all the work for you, which is simple. But it does say you can also call a URL, and that could be an A5W page or some other URL that does this too. So you're not limited to what I'm going to show you today. Either one is available. But to be honest, 99% of my stuff is internal Xbasic function because it's simple. Now, if I click here and you'll notice it says, okay, we're going to use internal Xbasic function. Here's my function name. And you can see very important, there are a number of instructions right here on how to do that. It kind of explains the pieces from there. So again, as they walk through here, it tells you about all these things and function there. Now, if I click this little 3 ellipses, you'll see there's nothing there because I have not created any Xbasic functions. If I had created an Xbasic function, then you would see that here and I could say, oh, call that function. This is kind of handy if you end up renaming something, you can quickly retie it to your Ajax callback action JavaScript. But usually you kind of step by step create it and do it all at one time, but this is available from there. So I'm going to go ahead and say my calculate is going to be the name of my function name called calculate. Now, again, if I just save this and hit it, there's no actual Xbasic function, so it would fail. So what it gives me is some really handy little tools down here. Create a function prototype and open Xbasic. So you think really what you'd have to do is go over here to Xbasic, write out your function, then come back here and point at it. Alpha kind of simplifies your life. It allows you to do this very, very quickly. So first thing it's going to do is say, okay, I've given it the name calculate. I'm going to click on this first little blue link line called create function prototype. And this opens up essentially a prototype builder, and there are 2 options, with comments, without. So this is basically your 101. This is all you need to do to put into your Xbasic functions and put in your calculation. That's it. This is the structure that needs to be there for this callback to it, because, and I'll explain, it's passing the state of the essentially what's in the browser back to the function, and then you can use it from there. But I like with comments, and I almost do it there because in here is all this sample code that you can copy and paste that teaches you how to interact with the data from there. So I'm going to do with comments. So I'm just going to copy this to the clipboard. Now, once I've done that, I could close all this, go over here to Xbasic functions, open it up and paste it. But luckily, there's this second little link here called Open Xbasic Function Declarations. Click that. That essentially does the same thing as clicking on this Xbasic functions here, and I'm going to paste it. And now I've gone ahead and created my Xbasic function on there. And I'm going to click OK. I'll go call calculate. Oops. Okay. So there you are. I have set up where when I click on this button, it's going to call back to that Xbasic function, and I can then do stuff with it. And in that Xbasic function, I can send information back. So let's go ahead and save this. And let's do a working preview. Okay, I'm going to make the callback. And you kind of see it there. If you watch my cursor, you're going to see that the little circle thing happens when I click on it. And basically that circle says, hey, I'm making a callback to the server. And that's sort of tells you that it's just not clicking the button, it's actually executing. Now the issue is the function doesn't do anything this time, so off to the races, we have to go ahead and take on there. So let's do one other thing real quick. I want to make these so there is, let's go ahead and do here. I want to show, let's see, where is that? Let's see, label on the left, okay? I want to show the labels because it's a little confusing, and I'm going to use a nice little trick. I've set the position. I want these to be the same, so I can actually click on this position, click on the little eyedropper, select these two other items. Notice it's showing the left is there. Click Set Properties, and now what it's done is it basically will show those labels to the left of the fields right here. So that's a nice little trick I use to quickly adjust my formatting, make sure everything looks good from there. Okay, so my function has to do a couple things. One is it has to get whatever's input from these two fields and then put in this field the result of that calculation. And obviously beyond that would be doing error correcting and all that stuff. Won't cover that today, but you'll be able to do all of that from that standpoint there. So I'm going to go back now, and now that I have my Xbasic callback ready to go, I can focus my intention really on this Xbasic function. And as I mentioned, there is a ton of comments and documentation. This is really cool because it shows you all these neat tricks and information how to handle things. Basically, kind of a copy paste system. But I want to start with the most simple and then work my way up from there. So the concept, as I mentioned before, is that when that action JavaScript, it's going to send a message to the server. It's going to include all the current information about the state of that page to the server. So the server knows what's going on here. And then the server, or the Xbasic callback, the Xbasic function, then can send information back to the browser. And what it's looking for, by the way, underneath it is JavaScript. Basically, the information that's going to come back is JavaScript. Now, the cool thing is you don't have to write it. I'm going to show you a little example, by the way, that allows you to do anything you want. But the cool thing about Alpha and the Xbasic callback is Alpha will generate that JavaScript and all the other stuff for you, so you don't have to worry about it. But let's go ahead and show the example of a very simple example. So I'm in my function here. I'm going to go ahead and scroll down, and I'm going to go, there we go. Okay, so you'll notice right here, oh, that's the error. Where is my, there we are. No, not, sorry, all the fancy stuff there. Here we go. There is to return information. You basically, this is a function. Remember, our function is called calculate. You can go, and I'll put this in here and go calculate is equal to, and then inside of here, I can return some JavaScript for it to play. Now, again, this is a simplistic, you don't normally do that, but let's go ahead and show you what that would look. Okay, so I wrote this little piece of valid JavaScript here, and basically I'm returning from my function that to the calculate function. So now when I save it, go to working preview, you'll say make callback, voila. So as you can see, what's happening is that it's making a callback, sending some JavaScript back to the, as we mentioned here, sending that little piece of JavaScript, and then the browser says, thank you very much, and it works that JavaScript, and that does pretty good stuff from there. So, 101 is anything you send back from there is JavaScript and will be run on the web browser, which opens up a lot of really cool stuff, which I'll show in a moment. Now, important is, we'll show even more importantly, you don't have to write all that JavaScript. Alpha actually takes some of that work for you, and we'll also show you that from there. But that's step number one. Well, that's actually pretty darn powerful to begin with. So let's take an example of this. Let's go over here to JavaScript actions, and I'm going to notice it's not here because it's tied to the button. I'm going to add a new one. I'm going to go show message. Then I'm going to go in here. I'm going to go into my show message. I'm going to click here, and I'm going to do a drop-down message. And I'm just going to leave it just plain. Actually, let me do this message, and I'll go, hello, hello. So remember, this is going to be writing all that JavaScript for me. So now I have this show message JavaScript here. Now, what if I want to, after I do this calculate, I want to actually have the system run this, Well, it's very simple. I just go here to click to see the JavaScript code. This is the JavaScript you would do to run this little piece of action JavaScript. I'm going to go ahead and copy that. Click OK. And now what I'm going to do is I'm going to put inside here that little piece of JavaScript. By the way, if I wanted to, if I had a bunch of stuff, I could do something like this, just not to get too off track. And then Java 1, Java 2, blah, 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 blah. You could put out a whole bunch of it and then return that JavaScript. So you're not limited to a single little line. You could actually create pretty sophisticated stuff. Now,
So,
again, you want
Jim,
me to really do that?
if I can
Yes, sir.
interrupt you for 1 second, it's
Oh,
just a real
please do.
basic JavaScript question. Someone was asking, what's the rule when you use one equal sign versus using two equal signs? I know people who are new to JavaScript or
Oh,
that type
good
of
point.
syntax aren't used to
Okay,
it.
yep. So first, in Xbasic, equals is equal. So that's why I use one single, because that's how Xbasic. In JavaScript, you have equals and equals equals. Equals is called an assignment. So I'm assigning one thing to another, like you're seeing here.
Like you've
It's
done here.
basically we're assigning this information here. Equal is a comparison, saying are these things the same? And in fact, there's a equal because then it even says, is the object the same? It's a little tricky there. So this is like a comparison operation, like does 1 equal 1? And if that's true, or does, does the value of X equal 12? Then yes, you would use this equal. This is, I want to set the value of this equal to be this. So I want to put 12 in this variable. You would use the single equal sign.
Thanks very much.
You're welcome. Good. So I created my action JavaScript. I just pasted it right here. So let's save it and let's see what it works. So I call back to the server, and you'll notice it called back. The server said, okay, and sent back my action JavaScript command. And now here's my action JavaScript command, and it just works. So right away, you can do some really cool stuff where you can call the server, check some stuff, and then call action JavaScript to say maybe even navigate to do something. I mean, as you know, action JavaScript is incredibly powerful. You can do so many things. So it could be just a way to, I'm going to call the server, get some information, then run some action JavaScript. And that's really reliable because then you don't have to worry about writing complex JavaScript to send back. You basically put your stuff in action JavaScript. And remember, action JavaScript can have more than one step and then just call it. And I like that a lot because it keeps this very clean, meaning I don't have 20 lines of JavaScript and I have to debug it. I let Alpha write all the JavaScript, and then I just make a click here, copy this, and make that call there. So that's basically 101. But again, not super interesting yet because we're not really doing anything there. So let's go back to our original purpose to create a calculator. What I want to do is I want to get that number and then send back the, let's call it just the addition of these two numbers from there. So let's go back to our Xbasic function. So I'll go dim number 1 as n, and I'm going to tell you why this is important in a moment. Number 2 as n, and dim result as n. So these are my internal variables that are inside here. And I could have named them anything I want to, but again, I just want to set them up and also want to say numerics because I'm going to be doing math in this situation from there. And I apologize. I know we explicitly stated there was no math on our webinars, but there's just going to be a little. I slipped it in there. It's kind of a mean thing to do that. So
Will there be geography though? That's what I want to know. Yeah.
I know. It's like all those teachers, there's no math. And it's like, suckers here. Okay. So our first step is we need to get the values of these two things into these variables. So number 1 is equal to. Now, the way we do that, and I'm going to do it the hard way, I'm going to do the E way. There is, you remember this E thing up here, that is currently, when the person hits the button, that's all the information about what's in the browser, including the field values and everything else. So inside here, and I'll stop it and show you, is a ton of information that you can use to then for the server to kind of know what's going on the client to be able to make adjustments, like looking at the current state values of things and things like that. So you go E dot, and don't worry about memorizing this, don't worry about it, submitted dot number 1. Okay, So what this basically, and by the way, you can see it's right here. Is how, I'm going to go ahead and copy that and make that. I don't think it's case sensitive. I'm not worried about it, but just in case. So what this does here is inside the E in the subparts data submitted is the values of all of my fields. What's in number 1, number 2, and number 3. So basically I'm saying, grab that stuff you sent back to me and just put it in here. Now, why did I define this as it? Because this is character data. So when the information comes back, and I'm going to go all the way here, when I click this, it creates some text information in that E variable, sends it over here. So when it arrives at the server, it's text. So if I didn't dimension it, then it would say, oh, that's number 1 is just some text, whereas I need it for numerics. So just be aware that everything inside this E.submitted is is text, so like dates, numbers, whatever it happens to be. So you have to just be a little careful to make sure you're setting up your variables. So when this gets populated, it's saying, oh, I'm going to convert this text to a number, and that's what it'll do there. Now, again, I could put it into a character and convert the character in Xbasic, but this just saves you some time. Now, that's kind of a pain to do this. So what I can also do this is I'll go number 2 is equal to. Now, instead of writing that, you'll notice there's a little line up here called Control D displays a list of the controls. So I'll do Control D. Aha. Notice what it's showing here. Here are my controls on my user interface. So I'm just going to click on here, and then I want to say E.data submitted as prefix. Boom. So now I don't have to worry about my continual fumble fingers. It's going to write the code for me. Therefore, it's going to, I didn't accidentally misspell a number or miss a letter or miss a dot or things like that. So I highly recommend when you start doing this, instead of trying to type all this stuff in, just go to where you want it to be, hit Control D, pick it, add data submitted, and you're good to here. Okay, so now we can do result is equal to number 1 plus number 2. Now now that I've got that information, I want to send it back to result. So you might think, oh, okay, I'm going to have to get that result and then turn it into some action JavaScript, or I'm sorry, into JavaScript and be able to do that. So in fact, what I'm going to do is get rid of this, and the answer is no, no, no. You don't have to do that. Alpha will do it for you. So what I want to do is I want to set.
Yeah.
Oh, yes.
Go back. Just pre-do that. You've got E.data submitted number 1 twice, as a number of people
thank you very
out.
much. Great, appreciate that. Extreme programming with 2 people. 12, like 28 eyes are better than 2 for sure. So again, what I want to do is I want to set the value of the. Notice I'm getting the data, but now I want to return that information. Now I'm going to take the shortcut and just go Control D. And again, here are all my results. So there's result. That's what I set. But notice down here, add E.submitted grabs it from the client. But notice there's a second one here called E._set. If you click there and click there, notice what it's doing is it's taking that field name here and putting it between here and here. And I'll just say is equal to result. Okay, so what's going on in here is that we're going to send back, we're going to grab that E, we're going to update it, and then send that E back. So inside that E is all the information this needs to be able to update fields and do other things like that. Again, you can pass your own JavaScript, but I don't have to worry about doing that. Basically what happens is if I put whatever I want in that, and notice it's saying value, I'm going to come back to that in a moment, then what happens in there, which is cool, is that it takes this and turns it into JavaScript for you. And that's one of the beauties of this system, is that you can, even though it looks a little arcane, you're in the Xbasic world, you can debug it, etc. It's going to convert all that stuff to JavaScript, so you don't need to do it. So now I have my numbers, I dimension them so I get it correct. I load them up coming in. I do whatever I need to do with it. This could be calling an API, calling a database, etc. And then I'm going to set the value of the result field. That's basically, this says set the value of the result field. And that will take in my math. So let's see. Let's give it a try. Start from the start. 1 plus 1 is equal to make callback 2. Boom. And you notice I didn't write one line of JavaScript. Alpha took care of it. And this can be a lot more sophisticated. So we'll do 2 times 2 equals make callback. Now, as I mentioned, you know, right now I have to click this button to make that callback. Well, let me show you a cool trick, because what I'd really like to do is when number 2 changes, I'd like to go ahead and update that. Like, you know, have it autocomplete kind of scenario. So here's a real cool trick, kind of a side thing, but I'm going to do it. I went in and I go, oh, you know what? I'm going to make my callback on this button. I did all my action, but oh man, I really wish I had put it on JavaScript actions. Well, there's a little cool thing when you open this up. It says convert to JavaScript action. So if I just select this, click here, I select what I want to convert, and this could be multiple commands. I'll go there, and I'm going to call this, I'm going to call it calculate callback. That's my naming convention, and click OK. So you'll see it did 2 things. One, it converted this from the actual action JavaScript into a run action that says callback, you know, calculate callback. And what's neat is that if I go to my JavaScript actions, it actually put my action JavaScript here, and all that's the same. So it saved me just from the work of having to go back and reset it up here. It's all done there. Now, the benefit of that is I can go to this number 2. I can scroll down here to the on change event. I can open that up, and I can then do the run, you know, basically I can say run action, or I can just go over here and say insert code to run this, calculate callback. Those are basically the same. To be consistent, I'm going to do the following: is I'm going to go to the on change event. I'm going to say run action, and the action I would like to run is calculate callback, and click OK and click save. So now let's give this a try. Now I can go 3 times 3, and you'll notice when I changed this value, when I moved out of it, you saw that callback got called and the result got in here. It's essentially the same as clicking here. So I can just go in here. So again, as you can see now, we're doing some nice little things to improve the experience for the user, where they just change some numbers and then it calls back the server and does it. And that could be very, again, these are very simplistic, but that could be extremely sophisticated kind of back-end processing, recalculating things. I mean, there's many ways to do it that's open from there. And again, the way I accomplish that is now by having my JavaScript action there, I can call it on this button or on the on change event or in any other scenario. I could actually add that to other Xbasic. So you can get pretty sophisticated very quickly here. Now, I did want to add one quick comment, and I'm not going to go into detail here. I want to show you a few other cooler kind of things here. So JavaScript actions, you'll notice that I'm going to go in here and I'm going to go here. You'll notice that, oh, I'm sorry. Let me go back here. So if I go back to my on change event and I run that action there, you'll notice there's something called pass in a reference to object that invokes the action. So, and I'm not going to demo, but what I want you to be understanding is that when I make the callback from something, I can actually pass a reference to that thing. So I can say, oh, the callback was made from the OK button. The callback was made from the result. Often you don't really need this, but it makes it for very cool things, because for instance, I could add that on change to number 1 and number 2, and then I can understand what called me, what was the thing that triggered this, because it may change the behavior of the back-end system, meaning it may be saying, oh, they were changing the oil setting versus this, and then I want to operate differently. So that's what this pass in a reference is. You can make the same callback, but then pass in a reference, which would also give it more information that you could then dissect in information. There's another way you can do that too, is that if you wanted to put your Xbasic on that one location, and I'll just show you this real quick. Let's say I had this Ajax callback still on this button. There's something here called additional data to submit, because I have this in my applications now. Often you have a single Xbasic callback function, but it's getting triggered from different places. And you don't want to have to write a separate sort of function for every one of those, since they're essentially the same. So you maybe just want to put a select statement saying, well, if it's called from this button, do this. If it's called from here, then what you can do is either that reference, or you can put in here like underscore var1 is equal to A. And what happens is it throws this information. I know it looks a little confusing, but you'll see that it's down here and you can put more than one variable. So what happens is when this Ajax callback, it submits this information, and then I can grab that var1 value in my Xbasic command and be able to then say, oh, I know where that came from or which device. So either way is equivalent, whichever you like, but that just wanted to make sure you're good from there. So let's go ahead, and I'm not going to adjust that. I'm not going to do that from there. Now, there's a couple other quick things I want to show you, then open it up for questions on that. Two really super powerful things. So let's go ahead and go back to our JavaScript actions, and I'm going to add a new action. And I'm going to go show temp message. And I'm going to go ahead and create that temp message. I'm going to use the message transient, and I'll say calculate done. And I'm not making a pop-up because I just want the person to see that something happened, because sometimes it's not as, like, for instance, I'm showing the result changing, but that's not necessarily what would happen. And then we'll go like that. Okay. Now remember, I'm going to go ahead and click this JavaScript code. This is what I need. I'm going to copy to the clipboard. Okay, so this is just going to show a little message on there. Now, I could do one of two things. One is I could go to my Xbasic functions, go here, and in fact, I'll show you this because I want to show you both methods, and I'm going to paste it there. So now what happens is after this finishes it, Alpha is going to go ahead and write the JavaScript that in terms of updating the fields for me, and then it's going to do an append to append my stuff on it. So you can use a mix of sort of Alpha's internal stuff and ours, or yours in terms of that. So now watch what happens. We'll go ahead and go 1, 2 times 3. So you see what happened is that it wrote the JavaScript to update that, then it passed on my little calculate done message there. And this is nice. And this is kind of powerful because depending on what happens here, you might want to send back like a warning message or do something else. So there's different ways to show information to the user there. But there's another way which I really like, and I kind of, you know, I go back and forth, but I really like it from here. So I'm just going to go ahead and copy this out of here. And I'm going to go ahead and do this. And I'm going to go back to my control. And what I'm going to do, or I'm going to go back to my JavaScript action. And I'm going to go back to my calculate callback, and I'm going to open it up on there. So you'll notice we're calling the function, but you'll notice this area called advanced. I talked about you can submit more data. And you can also, by the way, if you have list controls, normally it doesn't send the list control data back, but you can click that and would add the list control, which is really nice because then in your Xbasic, you can read what's in a list control and take action on it. And a lot of really cool things do here. But what I wanted to call your attention to here is after callback complete JavaScript. So what this is saying is I'm going to go ahead and run this Xbasic function. I'm going to grab whatever it sends back to me and run that. But also I can tell it to go ahead and run any of my JavaScript right here, including action JavaScript, after this is run. So you can either do it in your Xbasic or here. I tend to find for certain things it's easier just to do this because this will always run back after the callback is completed. So it makes things pretty nice from there. So now you're going to not see anything different, but what's going on is instead of the Xbasic command doing that, this is actually being done after the callback is completed. And that's kind of cool. So there's different techniques and ways to do that. And so that I wanted to show you. There's a couple other quick things I want to show you real quick on this. First, you can submit location information. And if the location data is enabled, like this is especially nice on a mobile product. Now, remember, if you're on a browser, it's going to ask the person permission, but you could actually gather their information from their device and add that in your Xbasic to do data updates and other things like that. There's also, which is really nice, two key features. One is after failed JavaScript. So let's say it sends stuff back and something fails, much like getting a callback complete, I can have it run some JavaScript. And this I don't use a lot, but really it allows you to harden your system by saying, if any kind of error happens, don't leave the person in a lurch, put up a message, reset some fields, etc. from there. The other feature, which was just added fairly recently ago, is it will check to see if the server is available. So the most common situation is you're on a mobile phone, it gets disconnected, the system tries to make an Ajax callback, but if you don't have a network connection to the server, then say la vie, nothing's going to happen. So this actually does a server is available, and then if it is not available, you can then either pop up a message, it has a default thing, or you can code your own, so giving a message saying, please retry, don't change anything, or I've stored it locally, yada, yada, yada. You can also perform a speed test. So let's say you're going to send a lot of data up, like a whole bunch of list information or stuff. You can do that. So they've added a whole bunch of sort of fine tuning to make your code more reliable in this interaction. And the last thing we're not going to cover here is, but I want to note it, is chunked responses. And we've actually done a presentation on this. Wow, it's been a while back. There is a webinar that goes through how to do this, but this basically says, okay, I'm going to make a callback. If you'll notice in my code right here, I do a bunch of stuff and then I send a message back. Well, what if this takes a minute, 2 minutes, 3 minutes to do that? Let's say it's doing a reconciliation process or some long back end there. Then in my code, I can use what are called chunked, and the code example is down here. Sorry, go all the way to the bottom. You can actually down here send during your process messages, and this will send messages back to the client, say maybe update a countdown clock, update something, tell the user another message. So it allows you to communicate for really long back-end processes, update statuses, which is really handy from there. And that's called chunked responses. It includes some capabilities you do in here inside your Xbasic, and then inside of the actual callback, you have to enable that. I enable that. And then, then there's some other things about doing it, some timeouts and stuff like that. And again, there's some great documentation on it. There's a demonstration a while back on there. And in the Xbasic code, there's some sample code you can copy and paste from there. So I wanted to kind of stop there, open it for questions, make sure we cover other questions, but that's your kind of like intro 101 to Xbasic callbacks. They're super powerful. I use them all the time. I do some very sophisticated things because I can mix their pieces, our pieces, and the more you use it, the more comfortable you are, and you're going to do some great stuff with it. It's really, really cool.
Awesome. Well, I'm looking through questions here, and there are questions. I just want to see if I can find ones related first to the topic at hand. We tend to do it in that order. Yeah, here's a question. So before you were talking about how when you're getting data back from the web and it's going into Xbasic, it always comes back as a character when you're in that eData submitted box. So what they were wondering is how are like logical values, which I suppose would be like checkboxes, or for that matter, dates represented when they come back? What does that format look like?
Cool. Let's go ahead and do that. Let's go ahead and add a text box, and we'll call it date. And I'm going to go in here, and I'm going to make that go back up. I'm going to say this is of type date. Okay. Then I'm also going to add a checkbox. It's a really good question. And I'll go checkbox. Sorry there. Okay. And so I have those two there. And again, this could be a character, but what I usually do for checkboxes, I make them numeric and treat it as a logical field. That means it's really just a yes or no kind of scenario. You're welcome to change that and use it a different way, but that's usually how I do it from there. So if I go back to my Xbasic function that I've created, much like I do here, I want to load something. So let's go checkbox is equal to, and I'm going to do Control D, checkbox, add eData submitted, and then also what I call that date field. And notice I am not declaring them yet. So I'm just doing it for interest here. So date, okay? And I'm going to go right here and I'm going to add a debug because I want to actually look at that when it runs. So all I did was add those two fields, add it in here, use the little Control D to do this, and we can see what happens here. So I'm going to still trigger it like that. And oh, it didn't have any values. So if I step through these, you're going to see checkbox.
Dion, I think we may have lost audio from you, but it may also be that my audio's jumped
No, I
out.
can confirm.
Okay. All right, let me just ping him. Lost audio. Just send him a quick text. Although it probably is telling him the same thing. Hold on a moment while we get Dion back on the line.
I'm sorry, I lost you for a moment. My network
Excellent,
went
you're
wonky.
back. Wonderful.
Yeah. So, and then date field is empty. So let me go ahead and just run this real quick. And then I'm going to go ahead and put in a date here. Oh, I didn't
I'm
put a
looking
date
at,
picker.
I
Let me
think,
do
the
that.
wrong screen, or maybe you need to share again.
Oh.
Because I'm looking at your slide panel.
Oh, okay.
Ajax, what is it?
Yeah, sorry.
No problem. All right.
And it's really going wonky on me now.
You know, we did do a sounded video check, of course, before, and everything
We
was
did. Well, I think my network went south for a moment, so it just
Oh,
got
did it?
confused.
All right.
Yeah, drat.
All right, this is cool.
That's just right.
Oh.
Okay.
All right.
Well, bottom line is what it will come, both of them. So the trick is, as I mentioned earlier, declare your variables, and when you load them, Alpha will do the automatic from them. So if I do
Yeah.
date field, it will date. So what I really want to do here is call dim checkbox as B, not B, for L, as that's for logical, and then dim date field as D. And then that way, these are now in those formats. You don't have to worry about it and doing the conversion. Although you can do the conversion your own. Xbasic has a massive number of conversion features in it.
Yeah, a couple of people chimed in saying, yeah, wouldn't you want to do like a convert type, which is one of the functions. So convert type, and you
Yeah.
put in the value that you want to convert, and then you follow that in quotation marks by D for date and for number, I think L for logical, and so on. But it looks like you don't have to do that if you let Alpha do the work for you if you dim it ahead of time. Cool. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Good question. Thank you very much. Sorry about the little glitch in the middle there.
Oh yeah, no problem at all. Let me go get to the other questions here. Someone said, is there a list of N or L or D, etc.? I think that's documented with the function.
Yes, indeed. If you go to the Alpha Anywhere Fabulous, variable types.
Yep. But maybe even under convert type, the function itself
that's
may tell you when it's
Xbasic. Yep. And I'll put that into the chat.
Yeah. Okay. Wonderful.
I thought I copied that.
Someone's just asking off the cuff, what's an example of your most sophisticated Ajax callback? What's one that you've done where you're like, oh, that was cool?
Okay, so it was basically the sophistication was the following was it was doing basically a really fancy matrix report where I had to do three things. Basically, first, it took a while to run because it looked at a whole project and it basically looked at every element of the project and created a cross matrix report. I tried to do it in a standard report. It didn't work. Actually, I do use the report to present it. I also use a view box, but the actual data, there was just no way to do it in there. So what happens is it calls that calls an Xbasic function that then calls stored procedures in the database to do the collation and pull the stuff back. Then the Xbasic function kind of packages it up into a nice JSON format, and then it sends it back to the front end and displays it in a view box. And it's really cool. It's all color coded, and it also allows you to change like the way it's presented, and it's about basically saying, what's the state of my project in a cross matrix function? So the two things that were tricky on it is that I call an Xbasic function, but then in there, I don't put my logic there because it's so hard. I actually created an Xbasic class that had that logic. So I centralized it. Plus I could test it without the user interface. And then I was calling obviously the database within there. The other is that because it took a while, I ended up adding chunked because I wanted to make sure the person knew the thing just didn't go into la la land, that it actually was
Sure.
still doing something
Still
on the
working.
back end. Yeah. I mean, if anything goes over 3/4 of a second, people think that it failed. I think that's just
I know,
I think that's
exactly.
even come down. I know
Yeah,
that's
it's
being generous.
it's a quarter of a second now, or my kids lose
Yes,
interest.
exactly.
Yeah.
Stupid system. It's dumb. It's got off their la la land. Like, dude,
Funny.
cool down. No, anyway,
right.
that was kind of an
got
example of
another-
that. The only other one is calling an API. I actually did some back-end API stuff that it did, but that was another.
Very
Go
cool.
ahead. Sorry, interrupted.
Yeah, so we've got about 5 minutes left, and this question was sent in ahead of time, and I do like to give those
good.
priorities. So this has to do with containers in a panel card, and I think you're going to know the answer to this. They have a panel
Okay.
card, and they have 3 containers stacked one on top of the other. And what they want to be able to do is hide the one on the top without the 2 at the bottom shifting up. In other words, it wants
Okay.
a placeholder that's always going to be there for that panel card.
Okay.
Or sorry, for that container.
So,
It's just
container,
one panel
yeah.
card. Yeah.
I just wanted to chime in. This is like the opposite that everyone's always asking to do.
Yeah. Yeah. Exactly.
Everyone wonders why,
Yeah.
because they
How do I
don't
get
want
around
the space.
There's nothing here.
Yeah, exactly. Don't
Yeah,
want
I'll
the
show you
Total
both of them.
opposite.
Sure. Well, maybe they've got a reason.
There's always that guy. Okay, so here's some containers. Let me go ahead and just put in text or static text.
Mhm.
Duplicate this, and I'll move it down. Duplicate it again. Okay, so the first thing that's cool about a container is you can create a height and width. So let's create a height of 100 pixels by 100 pixels. As I went before, I'm going to take this container width, I'm going to copy it and do it for both of these. So I'm going to set the properties there, and I'm going to set the same thing. And what I'm doing is a shift click to basically, and notice it remembers them. So it comes
Great.
there.
Yeah.
Okay. So now we should, and containers are invisible, so we could put little circles in. So there's test 1 and 2, 3. So if I go in here and let's do a show hide. So let's do a show hide client side equals 0. I think it's going to try and shrink it up. Let's see what happens here.
Right. If you said 1 equals 2, or yeah, okay.
Yeah.
Yep.
Okay. So what we were talking about before is container float is like when it does disappear, it always adds a little gap. So if you don't want that gap, that's usually what goes on from there. Actually, that's a really good question. I'm thinking now, if you want to meet,
Yeah.
I'm like, okay, I was trying to think through it as I did this other, but I'm thinking, because when I hide it, I'm hiding it. So here's what I would do. Okay. So I'm going to go ahead and put another container in here.
There we go. One that only appears when the other one has disappeared.
Yeah, I was just watching The Hobbit, and there's that scene where Gollum they're doing little quizzes with each other, and I was like, oh, there. So I can just go in here and go 100 px, 100 px, and then I'm going to go in here. I'm going to leave that one available, and see that gap is there. So I would just create a placeholder container that would take this place of this. And then this, even though I've hard coded it, it could be on something else. So let's just do that real quick. Let's add a control text box. Go show hide. And I'll say default value is 1. And I'll go here. And I'll say if, and I'm just going to go down to the show hide. Where is it? Yeah, I'll go show hide equals 1. And then this one, I'm going to say show hide equals 0. So they act differently. Let's see if this works here. So basically, I've got that same space there. Now, if I go 0.
There you go. So in
one.
other words, do
And it just-
another container and just use the same logic, well, opposite logic for each one.
Exactly. And then that
Perfect.
way you maintain that space, that integrity in there. And this doesn't have to have anything in it. I'm just using it as a place environment from there.
Fantastic. Well, we are out of time. Unfortunately, we're not out of questions. So please send those questions to guides@alphasoftware.com. Dion, thank you very much for presenting.
Thank
Sarah,
you.
thank you very much for being here and helping out. If you do have more questions, of course, guides@alphasoftware.com. We will be here next week and hope you have a lovely week in the meantime. One last thing I'm sorry if there's any more. I thought there was one last question. No, I take it back. I'll see you guys next week. Thanks again. Bye-bye.